Hi, welcome back to Written Book Mavens. I'm Amanda, she's Rachel, and you're joining us for Mystery March, which clearly I am absolutely pumped about. This month, we are reading mystery novels that I have selected because I love alliteration, and Mystery March was just too good to pass up. So to start us off, because Rachel does not read a lot of mystery, I started her with the Queen of Mystery. It says so right on the book. Agatha Christie. Now, so Agatha Christie is known for her long-standing detectives. She has several of them. There's the Tuppences, Tommy and Tuppence. I forget their last name. Tommy and Tuppence. She's got Hercule Poirot, my personal favorite. Mrs. Marple. And they have, dozens of books each. But
Alice is
just living his dream life right now, getting all Rachel's attention. But to kick us off for Mystery Month, I chose And Then There Were None, which is a standalone book for her and is sometimes considered her kind of magnum opus, her best book. It is a suspenseful page turner. It's actually also quite short. It's only about 300 pages.
It is.
So it can be read in an evening. Mm-hmm. I'd say, honestly, once you get about halfway in, you're not going to stop. Like, you want to know at that point. By the time they get on the island and, it happens. So if you've never read this before and you don't want it spoiled, I would stop immediately because we're jumping right into it. Mm-hmm. Okay, Rachel, who's never read Agatha Christie before.
I'm not.
What are your thoughts? Tell us.
Okay. So my thoughts, being a primary fantasy reader, as all of you know, I don't really delve into mystery books too much. Now, where I've dipped my toes in, I've read a couple of J.D. Robb books, like her Jane something or other, like all the In Death series, and I've read some other kind of fun ones, like what was it, something Plum. Anyway, doesn't matter. I've dipped my toes here and there into some fun mystery stories. No, but the mysteries that I'm reading are contemporary or futuristic in the case of J.D. Robb. So this was interesting to kind of take a step back. And I've read some Sherlock Holmes. I guess that's not contemporary. So I read some Sherlock Holmes before, way back when, for school and whatnot. But it isn't my go-to genre. So reading Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. Going from the way fantasy books are set up, where there's a lot of descriptive, there's a lot of descriptions, there's a lot of world building. This is super stark. Mm-hmm. There is a sentence to describe something. And those of you who read fantasy, which is I think a lot of the people who watch our channel, because we do focus primarily on fantasy, understand that the world building and everything, fantasy books tend to be pretty chunky. They spend a lot of time describing things. The house is described in a sentence. The environment's described in a sentence.
There's
how people look
are
a sentence. So yes, it definitely does. You are left to use your imagination to build up those details. And as somebody who's relatively creative, I certainly did that. I certainly had an image in my head of what it looked like. But I know that my image probably looks very different than Amanda's, as opposed to with fantasy, where I think that we all kind of gravitate and we kind of see somewhat similar things. And I always notice that with fantasy because of fan art, that you see similarities among fan art. I don't think you would get that with this. So, so a lot of individual creativity. That being said, to me, this is like a counting game. You're literally just counting the bodies because there are 10. There are 10 people who are stranded on this island together that have been put there in this house and are told that they all have committed some crime in their past and are somehow going to atone from that. And the whole time, and you're introduced to this story by this nursery rhyme where they talk about all these soldiers, these 10 soldiers that kind of have different things happen to them. And so the whole story is built around kind of fixating on that nursery rhyme and how people exit the story are illustrated.
It's the no more monkeys jumping on the bed.
Yeah, it's a math game. It's just a math game.
It's a horrible nursery rime when I read it.
Subtraction. There it is.
Yeah, it's a horrible nursery rhyme.
Oh yeah, no, it's bad.
It's one of those where if you really listen to nursery rhymes sometimes,
I know, they're all terrible.
Ring Around the Rosie,
Cradle falling from a tree.
Do you know what that's about?
These
are horrifying, but this one is no exception. And one of the things that I actually think makes this book unique is that all of the characters are immediately dislikable. You don't like anybody. And that really bothered Rachel as we were going through. She's like, I'm not rooting for anyone. And I was like, you're not really supposed to. I mean, I'm not rooting for the murderer, but I'm definitely like, I have read a fairly substantial amount of Agatha Christie. So unlike her detective novels where you are actively rooting for the detective to figure out the crime, this one is so different because there is not a detective figure. You are living on the island.
They're all terrible people.
Yeah, with them in real time. And none of them are good people.
No.
Which is kind of the premise. Like they're not good people, but there's not been a way for them to be legally culpable for their actions.
They've like slid under the line. So this is almost like a vigilante
justice
approach.
book, if you will. Yeah. And so, but you're not rooting for any individual character. You are just right there along with them in this, like, the mystery is who is doing this. And it takes you on such a ride. I love it. I mean, it is unique amongst Agatha Christie, which is the part for me as the history fan that makes this book stand out, is that it is a very unique, it's very unique for her that there is not an external narrator figure. You kind of jump from character to character, their internal dialogue to what they say out loud. You kind of jump around a lot.
But it's so incredibly starkly written. There is no fluff. This is a bare bones story to me. There's no fluff.
But I think that's part of the ambiance of the story.
Absolutely.
Is like the whole story is about fear and suspense and how they are operating into that. Because of course a storm comes in that further, so they get dropped off on the island. They've all been kind of brought there under obviously false pretenses. Like they've each gotten what to them seems reasonable enough invitations or an offer for employment or whatever that get them to this island. But then their mysterious host, UN Owen, unknown, is not there. He's late. And then there's a storm that comes through. And so they just think we just have to hold on for one more night and then one more night.
It's just an increase in paranoia.
Yeah. The suspense just builds. And then the bodies, like they said, and it's like, one after another, and they're convinced that it's so interesting to watch how they try to like figure it out, and the way they start to look at it is like, well, each victim becomes like, well, they're innocent, it wasn't them, like in an effort to make sense of what's happening. I do also like that it's not particularly violent or graphic, which is nice for me. Because this is not, I'm not usually like a gory murder one. I like a good like heist just as much as
there's no descriptors.
Yeah, I like a mystery, but
yeah,
it's good. Okay, the conclusion. Let me read you. I went to the movies yesterday after work, and I come out of the movies, and there's just this whole stream of consciousness on my text messages from Rachel that... she's like, she's in the book, she's finishing the books, and then like her brain has moved on to other things. This is like stream of consciousness. Okay. She said, she starts with here, I think, I need a hint. Is it one of the people there that's murdering everyone or an unknown? 1 minute later, I'm looking at the timestamps on these two. 1 minute later, if so, it's Vera. And then like 30 minutes later, is it that everyone kills someone else? Then she sends me a screenshot of a chapter. Ooh, Lizzie Borden reference. LOL.
Yeah. Keep up with things. There absolutely is one. They're definitely talking about the Lizzie Borden murder.
Of course, yeah. 4 left. Hope you're enjoying my updates. Laugh emoji. How long was it? Yeah, 20 minutes later, down to 2 and 1 missing with the face emoji. Officially just 2 left 1 minute later.
Yeah, that wrapped up really quick.
She says, again, if you've not read it, stop immediately. She says, finished, not Vera. I hate that it was the judge. I discounted him immediately because it seemed too obvious. ... Sigh.
I was really upset that I hadn't figured it out because I was so convinced. Because if you've read it, Vera's according to the timeline in terms of when you're reading, that she's the last to die.
She's listen, she's left to be your stooge. Like,
she is, but she was probably like the most awful. So, you know.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
I
she
don't
allowed
know.
a child to die for a man. I mean, you just don't, for a woman, like that's, no.
Actually, for anybody, let's be
Yeah.
real.
Well, yeah.
But
That's
like,
just love.
I mean, they were all terrible in their own way. Like, they are, I mean,
that's like,
from the
like
first
psychopathic
chapter,
behavior.
when you are introduced to the first character, you're like, wow, this guy is awful. And then you keep reading another one, you're like, wow, he's awful. She's awful. They're awful. And then you're like, oh, wait, they're all awful. So it is, at the end, that's the twist, is that none of them actually make it off the island.
Well,
there's, bless their hearts, some poor little Boy Scouts.
Well,
A
they
Boy
had
Scout
seen them
troop. They saw
signaling with a
signaling
mirror.
SOS. So this troop with their troop leader goes out to the island and then
Just
discovers
10 dead bodies.
Yeah, bodies. That's scarring.
Yeah.
So then the final chapter, the epilogue, is actually the police discussing with each other, basically like talking through how they have no
can't
idea what
figure
it is.
out. Yeah.
And then the
The
epilogue
message in
to
a
the
bottle.
epilogue is a message in a bottle with the confession. It was the judge all along.
Well, because the judge is the only one that ends up being innocent. So, like, his whole story, right, is that he...
Really.
Well, I mean, that he's always wanted to murder someone, so this was an excuse to do so. But he hadn't up to that point.
Till he gets a terminal illness, and then he says, why not?
Yeah, just F it. We're gonna make this
Why
happen.
not?
But yeah, so he's just, so he was accused of killing an innocent man, and this very high profile case. Turns out the dude absolutely was
Had
the killer.
done it.
So,
So, but it's an interesting, the judge's confession is just kind of like,
it's so
it's
smug.
wild.
It's so smug.
Yeah, it is smug.
Ugh.
Well, I mean,
you don't like
he
anybody.
got away with it.
And, well, yeah, true. I mean, he dies in the end.
I
It's
kind
a
of
film,
loved,
his own
because I
thing.
thought for sure that, because as I was, watching Rachel read this at school and, as we were going through the week, she was like, Rachel is very character driven. She wants a character to root for. And
I
this
really
does
do.
not have that.
It doesn't. Well, she and I have had many conversations about The Great Gatsby.
I love The Great Gatsby.
She does. You wrote
I
a
love
paper
it.
about it in college, right?
I did a long paper, like a 10-pager.
And I hate The Great Gatsby. So as soon as I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a book of people that you don't like. And so I immediately went to our conversations had about The Great Gatsby, because The Great Gatsby also is all these characters that
You're not really rooting for.
You don't really care about any of them. So it's another one of those things, like for me, for a book to invest in means that there's to be some kind of like emotional tie to what's going on, because that's just who I am. And for this, like, you just don't, so, I mean, you're not, I guess I like it because there's no emotional investment. So, like, you can finish this book and put it down and be like, and then just move on with your life. Like, it's not like.
It's a puzzle book.
It's a puzzle book. And then once it's completed and all your pieces are in place, you just set it back on the shelf. And I didn't spend any time dwelling on it after. Like, it was done. It was wrapped up. You got to read the letter, and then it was done. And you're like, oh, okay. So 10 horrible people died on an island. The end.
But I really liked that even in the end, Agatha had surprised her. Yes, I'm on a first name basis with Agatha.
Well, I saw like
Agatha and I spent a lot of time together.
Well, it's interesting because you can see some parallels with some horror films, like Saw, the first Saw film. I mean,
this came out way first.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But you can see the influence
the book
that she has had on other things. Yeah, and like this idea that all of these things are happening, it's all like kind of psychological and paranoia is building. And meanwhile, the guy who's arranged the whole thing is really laying there, where you think it's a corpse, that this dude is dead, and he's just been laying there the whole time. And then at the end of he just gets up and walks away. And I'm like, oh my God. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, so that's where Saw got it. Like there was some connection there to kind of current storylines.
In terms of like
I know
plot,
Saw
and
is not something you've seen, but that's what happens.
I mean, do I know
it's not
that
for you.
Agatha Christie's been influential? Of course I do.
Yeah.
Am I
Just
gonna
saw
watch
it
it?
for that.
No, absolutely not. Because Agatha Christie she's a puzzle writer. Like that's what I personally really like about her work. Whether it's not all of her stories are about murder. Some of them are about theft or kidnapping, but they're puzzles. That's what they are. It's like you're trying to solve this puzzle along with a detective. And sometimes I get the puzzle right, and sometimes, like Rachel experienced, you don't. And what I kind of love is that you had discounted the judge because you thought he was the obvious answer.
It was too obvious.
And then twist.
Well, but the problem with it though is it being like so obvious. Though you read it, and I had kind of an eye roll, like, really?
But then it
You
wasn't.
know? But what?
But then it wasn't. Like,
No, I
you know
still
what
am
mean?
like, really?
No, I like it.
I just didn't. To me, this was not the most satisfying ending, because the entire time you're reading it, there's really no way you could puzzle it out because of the way she ended it. Like, that's what bothers me. Like, it doesn't matter how many times you would have read it. If you had never like read that last chapter, you would have never figured it out, because she wrote her way out of it. And so like that bothers me as somebody who, like, reading mysteries where, like, if you're paying close enough attention and you really think about it, that you can also solve the murder alongside the detective. But she doesn't allow you to do that.
It's meant to be the perfect crime.
And I just didn't care for that. That means, like, I spend all of this time, you know, you're mystery and you think like that it's possible, but no. And so to me, it's almost lazy writing, because anybody could have taken that and written any of them to do exactly what the judge did.
See, and I think it's the opposite. I think that
We have very different
I think
opinions.
you just don't like that you didn't figure it out. Like,
But no one could have figured it out.
Right, but I think that's what bothers you.
It does. For a mystery, you want to be able to do it. Even with, like, when you read classics like Sherlock Holmes.
But I don't know that that's actually...
You could work
but
it
that's not
out.
always true. Sometimes I just want to watch other people figure it out.
But nobody does.
Not in this case. Not in this
Right.
instance.
I'm just talking specifically about this book and comparing it to other mystery novels. I mean, Sherlock Holmes, if you go back and they lay the pieces out for you, you're like, oh yeah, you know, you can see how he could have gotten there and be like, okay, so if I had read it and picked up this, I would have also been able to figure it out. But you can't do that with this, because she could have chosen any of those characters to have done the exact thing.
That's part of what makes it so good.
And see, I think that's what makes this wasn't very enjoyable for me.
Well, I think also I've read a lot more of her stuff where she does do that with her detectives, where you are trying to piece together the pieces. Because all of her detectives have kind of a sidekicky type character. That's a very common trope with detectives. Is There's if you're a West Wing fan, you know, there's the Teledonna character, the character that you explain things to so that the audience can pick up on it.
Right.
And in this book, there isn't one. Like, this one is designed to leave you not knowing. And I can see that would be frustrating for you. But it is, it's part, for me, what makes this such a
But it wasn't even frustrating, because you don't like any of them. So you're not emotionally invested in the story. So then in the end, you're just like...
The first time I read it, I remember just being like, I just like sat there for like 10 or 15 minutes, like processing.
Well, we process things very differently.
It was
like,
so good. I feel bad. My friend, my friend had picked me up from the airport because we were going to go out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I need like 10 minutes to finish this book. She's like, go right ahead. That's how you know you got good friends. She's like, you go right ahead. So I ignored her for the first 10, 15 minutes we were in the car while I finished. And I was like, I'm going to need a minute. And I just sat there silently for like the next 10 or 15 minutes. And she let me do it. And then I was like, okay, now I'm ready to talk. Shout out to Julia, the real MVP of Friends, who picks you up from the airport to sit in silence for 30 minutes.
See, our experiences are very different. So you hear this is really positive experience. She had this great moment with this book. If I had this as a physical copy, as soon as I was done with this book, I would have gone to my window and thrown it out the window. That's how different we are. Like, this was...
Hey, but it got a reaction out of you. So.
It definitely did. But I mean, like, I wouldn't say that it was a positive experience for me. I know. But here's the thing. I had never read Agatha Christie. And I am very happy that I now can say that I did, and that perhaps it's just not for me, at least in terms of this book. Would I be more interested in more of like the classical mystery stories? Perhaps if I wanted to invest in spending that time reading her series, then that would be something I'd be interested in. But this type of story, this just isn't for me. But I'm glad that I was able to figure that out. So especially considering that it's not a very long story, it didn't take a huge time investment. So I'm so happy that I got to experience it.
So would you recommend it to people?
Well, yes and no. I would recommend it to people who are more like Amanda in terms of how you process a story and what you're getting out of it. Then yes. I mean, if you're somebody who enjoyed Great Gatsby, yes. If you're somebody who really needs a character to root for, and likes a really like huge world building experience, then I probably not. I don't think I would recommend that. It is extremely stark. Now, if you're looking for something, you know, to draw you in, and you stay in it. I mean, I was in it. for the book. I mean, like, I never wanted to DNF it, you know, because it's the ending. You know, the ending was to seal the deal on my opinion about this book. So, like, it's definitely an experience. I mean,
I recommend it to everybody. It's an experience.
It's an experience. Good or bad, it's an experience.
It's an experience book.
Sure.
I recommend it to, I can, I will, and I do. Recommend it to everybody. I recommend it to many a person.
Well, I think it's experience. Good. I think it's good. Like I said, it's not a big time issue. Nobody's going to get mad at you if they don't like it. I'm definitely not mad at her for choosing this book. Did I like it? No, but I'm glad I had the experience, and it wasn't a huge investment. It's not a series; it's a standalone. You know what I mean?
You could learn a lot about yourself as a reader. Like if you were not as self-aware of a reader as Rachel is, like in your being upset about it, you probably could have figured out a lot of things, like that you need a character to root for, or that you want more description of world building in place.
For sure.
But I mean, that's kind of the hallmark of the mystery of like a shorter novel. Like fantasies tend to be multi-book.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few standalone fantasy books.
Yeah, it's tough.
And so it is a very different genre. These stories are generally written to be pretty, I mean, you use the word stark, but they're written to be pretty bare bones because...
Well, it's very digestible,
you're moving, yeah, it's one book. You have one book start to finish to solve the puzzle.
Right. So you could, this would be a great airplane book.
Actually, that's where I did read it the first time.
There you go.
On an airplane.
You're on a nice, decent, 4 to 6 hour flight. Take it with you.
Or if it's a really like rainy night and you want to get creeped out.
I don't know if it's creepy just because, I mean, it's so set up for an experience.
If you live alone.
Just with these people.
If you live alone and it's a dark, stormy night and all you're reading about is people dropping like flies.
See, I can't read ghosty stories.
Because let me tell you,
because ghosts scare me.
It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much before your hallway becomes like, you're convinced there's something down
There's
there.
a TikTok I need to send you.
No. Absolutely not.
It talks about how people who live alone, who are lonely, should always read those books because then you feel like somebody's with you because they're watching you.
No, you did send me that. You did send me that. And I was like,
so good.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Read Nora. You'll never feel like you're alone again. That's pretty much what it
That's
is.
true. If you want to get good. Yeah. I will admit, it made me a little bit suspicious of everybody on the plane. I was like, what's your story? It's an experience book.
It is.
Okay, well, since Rachel wants a detective character, luckily for her, our next book is actually a new detective series that I want to try. I don't know if y'all can see his hair
it's just everywhere.
wafting around, and he was snoring a minute ago. He's really been the star of this. A new detective series. This is by Susan Elia McNeil, Mr. Churchill's secretary. It is the first book of, I'm trying to find her name. Oh, Maggie Hope. There it is. So this is, Maggie Hope is the series. She's the detective character. It's set, it's a historical period piece. Mr. Churchill's secretary is fairly descriptive, I feel like.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. Like, if I want to read a mystery story, this would be the type of format that interests me. So it's, you're with somebody as they're trying to solve a crime, so there's going to be big baddies, but you're also rooting for people to be able to solve the crime. Like, so there are good people in it.
Well, it is also historical fiction, so this is like right up Amanda's alley. This is like her favorite time period to study is early 20th century. So,
and I'm okay with it because they're not talking about real people. So, yay. I'm all about a historical setting. Just don't mess with the real people.
Rachel does
I have very strong, firm opinions about things. I don't like it if we've already talked about that. What book was that?
Oh,
it was one that
it was one that I recommended to you. So I'm sure you're starting to figure out that my recommendations for Rachel of things that I love don't often work out where Rachel likes them. But I'm going to keep making it.
I think, but the rest of the mysteries that we're reading are ones that Amanda has not read.
That's
so
true.
She selected
I've never
them,
read this either.
but she's excited about them, but she hasn't read them.
So I'm reading this as a mystery connoisseur who's read a lot of detective novels, and Rachel's coming at it from the other angle. So if you want to read along with us, go get your copy, and we will be reading this next week. Mm-hmm. If you've read And Then There Were None and have thoughts that you'd like to share one way or the other, leave it in the comments because I for sure would love to read them. If you've read other Agatha Christie, how do you think this one compares as a sample of her work? Let us know what you think in the comments. And like and subscribe. We'll see you next week. Bye.